Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Pelagian. I'm a law student and a volunteer at the Los Angeles County Bar Association's AIDS Legal Services Project. And I'm joined here today by Sarah Pazesh Kapoor, who's a senior associate at Metz & Harrison, a member of both the Disability Rights Bar Association and the National Organization of Legal Services Workers. She also serves as the president of the board of directors at the Disability Community Resource Center. Hi, Sarah. We're so lucky to have you here today.
Hi, Jacob. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I have been a disability rights attorney for 12 years, and I'm really excited to be a part of this project. This project was created in partnership with the City of Los Angeles Department on Disability to provide accurate and helpful information about your rights as an individual living with a disability. Knowing the law is extremely important, whether you're advocating for yourself or for others. We hope to provide you with a few of the necessary tools and resources that could make your experience with a healthcare professional more effective and more pleasant in general. Please also make sure that you download our companion PDF. There, you'll find several useful links to other disability resources where you might be able to get even more detailed information about something specific that is personally affecting you. You can always access this information on the AIDS Legal Services Project website.
Just to give you a little background information on the AIDS Legal Services Project, they've been providing pro bono legal services targeting the needs of people living with HIV for over 30 years. And since HIV is a covered disability under several anti-discrimination laws, people living with HIV are not only a protected group, but they're also a part of the broader disability community we're discussing here today. Unfortunately, people living with HIV face many of the same or similar stigmas as people with disabilities when it comes to discrimination, especially in a healthcare setting. And those stigmas move across the whole disability rights arena.
Just a quick disclosure before we get started. This guide is intended to provide accurate, general information regarding legal rights related to healthcare access in California, and it's current as of August 1st, 2020. This presentation is not intended to give you specific legal advice regarding your individual situation. In addition, laws and legal procedures are subject to frequent change and different interpretations. If you have questions or you need legal advice about your specific case, please contact an attorney or the appropriate agency about your rights.
Now, getting into some statistics, in the US alone, 61 million adults live with a disability, which accounts for about 1 in every 4 people. And according to the CDC, 1 in 3 adults with disabilities, ages 18 to 44, have an unmet healthcare need because of cost in the past year. So when it comes to equal access among those who are disabled and those who are not, healthcare settings are some of the most important places we should be considering. Yet the National Disability Institute reports that 60% of adults with disabilities worry about being treated unfairly while hospitalized. The intent of this video is to give you the information and tools needed to understand how you are protected and to take the steps necessary to self-advocate.
For this presentation, we've taken our definition of disability from the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. This is the broadest and most comprehensive federal law protecting the rights of people with a disability, and it is incorporated into several California laws as well. Under the ADA, a disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Sometimes these conditions can affect mobility. Other times they can affect cognition or communication. Some disabilities may limit your ability to perform major bodily functions or manual tasks, and sometimes they may keep you from taking care of yourself, from learning, or from working. Many people live with multiple disabilities, which affects them in more than one way. Some impairments may be episodic or in remission, but they're still considered a disability under the ADA if, when they're active, they substantially limit a major life activity. Your disability must substantially limit a major life activity, which means that your disability must keep you from doing the same things that someone without a disability might be able to do more freely. Major life activities are things like walking, standing, hearing, speaking, breathing, and eating, among other things. The ADA also covers people with conditions that affect the immune system, like HIV. The list of common conditions is very long, and we won't be able to list them all here. But things like arthritis, heart disease, cancer, and various mental health conditions are all considered disabilities for the purposes of the law.
In California, specifically, we have very strong state laws that protect you and others against discrimination. These laws were enacted so that healthcare providers maintain a certain level of care to all individuals, including those living with a disability. The most important anti-discrimination legislation is the Unruh Civil Rights Act, which, in addition to protecting people with disabilities, also protects against discrimination because of someone's age, gender, sexuality, race, and religion. You can see a few of the other federal and state protections on the screen here, as well as in our companion PDF.
One of the most important protections you have as a person with a disability is the right to request what is called a reasonable accommodation. And one of the most important things to remember about seeking an accommodation is that it has to be requested. You have to ask for it. You can't just assume that your clinician or healthcare professional already knows the kinds of accommodations that you require. So what exactly is a reasonable accommodation? A reasonable accommodation is a modification of a clinician's policies, practices, or procedures. In other words, the reasonable accommodation requirement means that your clinician must make certain changes so that you have equal access to the health care that they provide, and so that you get the overall level of care that you need, notwithstanding your disability.
Reasonable modifications should be readily achievable and should not create an undue financial burden on the healthcare provider. Fundamental alterations, on the other hand, are not required by law, even if it would provide you with an accommodation. A fundamental alteration is a change that's so significant that it alters the essential nature of the healthcare facility, or it's just outrageously expensive. For example, you may be requesting an accommodation that reduces necessary services to other patients in need of care. And so your reasonable accommodation may become a fundamental alteration. This means your healthcare provider has the right to refuse your request. But for the most part, and for the purposes of your self-advocacy, you can always ask for more and receive less. So if you do in fact require what either you or your clinician believes is a fundamental alteration, make the request and see if your clinician will compromise or suggest a different plan of action which also works for you. Keep in mind the reasonable accommodation obligation is an ongoing duty, as we mentioned earlier, and it can be altered later if your needs change. There may be a need for a different accommodation or even temporary accommodation, depending on how your health and ability changes.
A lot of times, your request may be denied, or you may experience outright discrimination throughout your visit. As an advocate, you can view your role as an educator and let your clinician know that you are aware of your rights as an individual living with a disability, and that you require something the clinician may not be used to yet. This experience does not always have to be confrontational. Now let's go over a few tips that might help you along the way in successfully getting your reasonable accommodation request met.
Remember, first, you need to ask. Make a request for a reasonable accommodation as soon as you are able to, and if possible, make that request in writing. While it's common practice for clinicians or receptionists to ask you before your visit whether you need any accommodations, you may encounter situations where you are not asked, especially if you're visiting a clinician for the first time, and especially if you have a disability that may not be immediately apparent to someone. Although it may seem like a harsh reality, if you don't ask, you won't get the accommodation, and if you don't ask, you have no case for discrimination as it applies to the reasonable accommodation requirement. It's best never to assume that your clinician will know what you need when it comes to your accommodations.
The second tip is to be very clear with how you give your clinician the information that they need to provide you with the proper treatment and appropriate diagnosis. Open up to your clinician at every appointment. Always say exactly what's happening with your mind or your body. Discuss the side effects from your medications and rate your pain, symptoms, and improvement on a scale from 1 to 10, even if this information seems repetitive. When you're giving this information, remember, be an advocate for yourself. Ask your clinician to examine the things that you know are wrong. Often, when you see your clinician, you're already sitting, and they may not be able to see the many effects your condition has on your body when you're standing. If you can't bend over very far because of your back pain, show them. If you walk with a limp or you have swelling, show them. Do this every time you get medical treatment, even if you've shown them the same things before. Don't be afraid to be repetitive. And also be aware that doctors and clinicians don't always write down what you tell them or what they tell you. For example, if a clinician tells you that you shouldn't be doing certain activities like lifting more than 10 or 20 pounds, insist that they write that information down and that they give you a copy for your records.
The third tip, which goes along with the first two, is record. What we mean by this, make note of important details that deal with your disability accommodations and healthcare experiences. This can be on a phone or a computer, on a piece of paper, or through a voice recording, really any means of recording that's available and accessible to you. Make sure you include things like the person's name who took down your request, the date and time, what their initial response may have been. Keeping a record is an important way for both you and your clinician to remember what was discussed, and it can provide vital information for future advocacy when your needs aren't being met. Telling your story. We want you to make sure that you tell your story and that your clinician knows what you need in advance of your visit. For example, if you need an accessible exam table, let someone at your healthcare facility know when you're making your appointment instead of at the time that you arrive. You may also want to let them know that you require extra time and/or extra assistance when you're making the appointment, just so that they're aware and sufficiently staffed upon your arrival.
You should never be refused treatment just because it might take more of your doctor's or their staff's time. And you shouldn't have to wait longer than other patients because the accessible exam table at the office is unavailable during your scheduled appointment time. If you choose to bring a family or a friend to the appointment to help, you may. However, just like any other patient, you can come to an appointment alone, and your clinician or healthcare provider must provide you with reasonable assistance to ensure that you receive appropriate medical care. This assistance may include helping you get on or off the exam table or other equipment. And once on the exam table, you may need a staff person to stay with you to help you maintain balance and positioning.
When clinicians are unable to perform an appropriate examination because you cannot transfer onto the exam or procedural table or chair, you may be misdiagnosed because the physician may not have enough information. Alternatively, you might miss the benefit of early detection of a serious developing condition. And this is why this accommodation specifically is so important.
Some other reasonable accommodation examples might be granting an early appointment to a patient with anxiety so that fewer people will be in the office and noise will be minimal, granting access to virtual healthcare, granting a request for a female clinician due to past trauma or general discomfort, modifying a policy requiring patients to complete their own paperwork so that staff can complete intake paperwork for a person with cognitive impairments, or allowing a service dog to attend the appointment.
Healthcare settings may also have to make architectural modifications based on the needs of their patients and employees. You can see some examples here on the slide, and remember you can download our companion PDF on LACBA's site. Check out some of our other videos for information about communication issues, privacy, vulnerable subpopulations, and more information on where you can file your discrimination complaint. Thank you for watching.